Hello and welcome everyone to the meeting of this council. May I remind you first of some domestic arrangements. The toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you are also consenting to being filmed by the council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film or photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you have finished. Can I move on the agenda, please? It is my intention to move item 15, motion on notice, to be considered before item 11 on the agenda. Thank you. So moving to agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies from Councillor Phillips.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declaration of interest by councillors. Are there any declarations? Item 3, MC/19/17, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 25th of July 2019 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? Councillor Muller.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of typos. On page 3, under Cabinet Member Portfolio Report, there's an extra N on B. And on page 5, under 10.1, Sean's got an E after the name, and there is no E. Thank you, Chair.
Could I have a proposal for the minutes, please? Councillor Brewster?
Just to move approval of the minutes, Madam Chairman.
All right, thank you. Councillor Eburn?
Thank you very much, Chair. On page 3, second paragraph, the LGA conference, while it might have been said, we have a briefing note hasn't been sent, so that paragraph is actually not true. We haven't had a briefing note, nor did we have headlines sent to us daily. Thank you, Chair.
So, Councillor Brewster, you're going to propose the minutes to be signed?
Indeed, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. Item number 4, MC/19/18, Chairman's announcements. I refer you to paper MC/19/18 to be noted, and I would also like to thank everyone who attended my hog roast barbecue, and we've raised over £1,700 for Home Start, so I'm really pleased. Moving on to agenda item number 5, the leaders' announcements. I would like to invite Councillor Morley to present her update.
Thank you, Chair. I have no leaders' announcements to make today. Thank you.
Item number 6, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Item number 7, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Item 8. Questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 9, MC/19/20, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Report. I would like to invite Councillor Wellham to introduce his report, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a lot to say. It's a fairly full report. There's just one error on page 21. Under a 5-year housing land supply update, the buffer for Mid Suffolk is 20%, not 5%. Otherwise, it's accurate, I think. I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Eburn?
Thank you very much, Chair. With regards to the Gypsy and Traveller sites, which is page 20, the top paragraph, I just would like to know whether the Gypsy and Traveller steering group has been held. Thank you.
Yes, it has, but Councillor Wellham, would you like to answer that?
Well, yes, I'm aware that it has been held, yes.
Are there any other questions for Councillor Wellham? Councillor Stringer?
Sorry. Would you mind if I answered that question? It will help the rest of the members, I hope. Yes, the Gypsy and Traveller Steering Group has met, and I'm one of the delegates on it. Just to remind members, it's there to not just help with the unauthorised encampments that we see, to try and spread the practice that happens there, but also as a sounding board for those that might have issues like that within their own wards, to give support to those councillors and trying to depoliticise what can often be quite a polarising issue. Thank you.
So moving on to agenda item 10, to receive reports from Cabinet members. I would like to invite Councillor Morley to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to introduce my report, CMU 1, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Matheson, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my question is, when will you next revalue the retail and restaurant properties bought by Sifco, bearing in mind the sector has another round of closures underway? I think since I wrote that, we've must add Thomas Cook, unfortunately, as well. And I have the answer. You want to read the answer out?
Sifco revalues all of its assets on an annual basis. Its valuers are due to revalue the portfolio again in March next year, 2020.
Councillor Eburn?
Thank you, Chair. With reference to paragraph 4.4, please could I ask, do we have enough staff to manage the sites that we've developing, given that we're in desperate need for social housing? And could you explain the plan for that? Thank you.
Yes, all the resources are done through the Growth Company. If there's any more detail required, I'd like to invite the officer to respond.
Any other questions?
Is there any other questions? Right, moving on to the CMU2, Leader Cabinet Member for Assets, Investments and Cabinet Member for Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement, Law and Governance. Are there any questions? Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to ask what, if anything, Mid Suffolk District Council is doing in terms of some sort of resilience if we have a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. As I understand that this has been recommended that councils do something about this, and other district councils, I am aware, are having some sort of resilience programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to provide an answer in that regard. So all the district councils and the county councils are working together in that regard. So you're absolutely right. And effectively, there are two streams of activity going on, both in terms of preparation for Brexit, whatever that looks like, in any way, shape or form. And we liaise. We have 9 regional chief execs who Suffolk collectively report into, ask questions of government, and government report back to in terms of aiding those preparations. Particularly that preparation is with regard to businesses and trying to support them as best possible in that regard. But in addition to that, there's a separate work stream that again goes through the same channels, but a separate work stream specifically looking at the resilience for the authorities and for the wider area in terms of, for example, emergency planning for the impact, not least places like Felixstowe, but more generally in terms of community impact. So there's a lot of ongoing conversations in that regard that go back and forth. and a lot of collective planning. We've had money from central government to aid us in that regard, and again, rather than Mid Suffolk trying to spend that money on its own, we've pooled that across the Suffolk system to make sure that we've got best impact. So you may have seen the recent newspaper article in relation to the Brexit advisors that have been appointed through the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce. That's our funding in conjunction with the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce to bring that support on board to enable businesses to be as best prepared as they can.
Councillor Passmore, would you like to say something?
Thank you. Just as a matter of information, we are having something at Public Sector Leaders tomorrow, an update on the preparations for Brexit, and just to assure everybody that the Constabulary are fully involved in that, and it's about forward planning, looking at all possible options. I don't personally think there's going to be any great sense of alarm, but obviously we have to plan ahead for those particular situations, and I'm sure we will be able to disperse more information after tomorrow's meeting. But I know it's looking at port security, bar security, transport, a wide range of issues. It's also a very good time when you get any major change like this for the criminal fraternity to take advantage of it. And I think it was last November we started discussing this, so certainly from where I am with my PCC hat on, I can assure you there's been a lot of preparation, so I hope that's reassuring for everybody.
Councillor Mansell, would you like to come?
Could I come back, please? Thank you, Chair. I'm asking this because it was asked of me at a parish council meeting, and I think it was actually more in terms of what would happen if food prices got so expensive that some of the poorer members of a community were unable to actually feed themselves, rather than businesses and security. But maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick.
I don't think I'm in a position to specifically answer that question for that parish council tonight, but certainly happy to take it offline and certainly point you in the direction of the materials that are available, which would hopefully begin to answer some of those questions.
Thank you. Councillor Otten, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you very much. It's on elections. With the numerous rumours flowing around about possible general election, probably in November, which is very unusual, normally elections being in May. I just wonder whether any special plans are in place to cope with an election during such poor weather, particularly for staff and obviously keeping any polling stations.
I think that one might be for me again as returning officer. So yes, I don't think it's possible general election is the basis that we're working on. It's when it happens rather than if it happens. And yes, like you, our anticipation is late November, early December possibly even, but there's no guarantees on that yet. We are anticipating the usual run-up time, so not any more or less in that regard. So 25 working days is likely to be our lead-in time. We've already started the additional risk considerations of what does it mean to hold an election in winter, effectively. And of course, that is very much dependent upon what the weather looks like at that point in time, because if it were, for example, today, then actually it's no different to holding it in May. But if we are knee-deep in snow, we're going to have different challenges. I suspect lots of shovels and 4x4s will be needed. But we have that well in hand to make sure that the election will run come what may.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
That up-and-coming election, I was wondering, what do we have in place to ensure that EU citizens have the ability to vote in a place? We have had quite a few concerns regarding this.
So, if there are specific questions about elections, I suggest I take them offline. But nothing has changed in that regard, so it'll be exactly the same as if the general election had been run last year. We have the issues, as we normally do, in relation to overseas voters more generally, so British citizens overseas, and the usual qualifications in terms of who qualifies to vote within a general election would apply, as we are today, subject to anything that changes on the 31st of October or otherwise.
Councillor Mattison.
Yeah, can I perhaps ask the Chief Executive, when he's working on that, if he could find out how many of these UC1 forms were sent out and received back in time in the May the 23rd elections, please?
Yes.
Right, so we're moving on to CMU3, Cabinet Member for Communities. Councillor Wellham, I believe you have some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I had 3 questions, and I've had, I had 5 questions and a very long response. Thank you very much for that. And you're right, there is a lot happening. But isn't it unfortunate we have to wait for, possibly 3 months for a meeting where we get a report like this? Could we not be drip-fed the information? For instance, Hawley Stow Upland, I don't know if we were both informed of what was going on there. I do know that there's something going on in Old Newton, but it's not listed. So, really, how can you make sure that members are better informed, please?
I think we could take it back to our leader and discuss whether it's worth putting out a little bulletin before the quarterly reports. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Yes, Chair. I think if next week you've got a meeting in Stow Upland, Old Newton, Hawley or Weatherden, I would like to think that you might let me know, and if appropriate, I could attend. Because quite often, the local member who's lived in the parish for, in my case, it feels like 100 years, has probably got a little bit of background. So we don't want a football club that's based in Stow Upland, but everybody lives in Ipswich, to try to pull the wool over your eyes when there may be better, other clubs that need the money more.
Agreed. Officers should inform ward members if there's something going on in their patch in time for you to go. Okay, you asked me specifically about the swims and whether they were going to come up for the half term and Christmas. In there somewhere? Yes. The answer is yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Eburn. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. Just with the, you've noted about the CAB and funding, which is coming to Cabinet. The issue there actually is that we fund quite a few organisations, and we often have service level agreements with those organisations. And I think it would be useful, particularly for new councillors, if a list could be provided, or can it be made public and put on the website? I'm sure that is public information, with the service level agreement and the amount and which organisation is being funded. Thank you.
Councillor
Ben, we are actually looking at those at the moment, because some of them we're going to look at closely and decide whether we're going to end up funding them like for 3 years and things like that. So there'll be a new list. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Passmore.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We'll get the order right here. Just a comment, really. If we're looking at leisure assets and the renewal of the leisure facilities, I know many of us will remember years ago when the facility was built at Stowmarket. It's very, very well used, heavily used. We've since expanded, of course, up to Stradbroke. What I really wanted to, I suppose, a degree of reassurance, if we are trying to make sure that people remain active in their life from cradle to grave, it's about how can we have a wide range of activities available with sufficient capacity. I know it costs big bucks, but it's got to somehow be spread all over the whole district. It's a heck of a challenge to do that. But I think when that paper comes to Cabinet, trying to harness in views and thoughts from right across the whole district is going to be absolutely crucial. I believe I'm right in saying, certainly a few years ago, the one at Stowmarket is the most widely used leisure facility, publicly owned one, in the whole of East Anglia. And of course it's getting old and a bit past it. I hope there are ways we can really move it forward, look at options, and also at the same time look at other facilities that perhaps owned by sports clubs. I'm obviously thinking of the rugby club myself. I know it's not all about that. Whether other activities could be arranged in other locations across the district as well, because we have got quite a few. Thinking rugby clubs, there's not just Stowmarket, there's Thurston as well, of course. I just wanted to make that clear and hope that will be included in your review when it goes to Cabinet and then to us. Thank you.
there was a task and finish group that looked at both providers when it came up, and I don't think I can say anything yet because it hasn't been in the press, but we actually had presentations from both Abbeycroft and Active Life, and they both came up with some fantastic ideas to spread activities across the whole district. So we're going to hold them to that, basically.
Councillor Turner, I believe you had some questions. Oh, sorry, that's a typo, apparently. Are there any further questions? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start by welcoming the progress with both the Active Wellbeing project and the rollout of social prescribing, not just because of the physical benefits that can be drawn from that around reducing frailty, increasing mobility, but also in wider social benefits like reducing isolation, loneliness, and just generally improving quality of life. And so what I wanted to ask, therefore, was what has the uptake been for these social prescribing schemes, and are there any plans to roll them out across the district?
Yeah, thank you. For the Stradbroke and Laxfield and all that area around there, the medical centre reported there were 77 elderly people or people who needed more activity. 77 was the take-up. We've just taken that on to Debenham, and within 2 weeks there was 22 people signed up. So that's really good. From there we're going to take it to I. Okay, thank you.
Carter.
I had a question regarding those activities that we're talking about here. How are they advertised and how are people informed about it? Because I'm concerned that some people may not have access to the internet, and how they are being informed about these activities. And the other point as well, the question is, many people who would like to go to these activities, with our transport, with the buses being cut down, are they going to be made accessible? Because I know that a few people who have limited mobility have just lost their bus service, they're unable to get into town centre.
Okay, well, at the moment, the doctor will actually prescribe the social activity, so it's in that area. So if family could take people, that might happen. I understand your case about the transport, which we are having meetings with county at the moment, Councillor Fleming and myself. So yes, I understand your point, but it will be in that area because it's that doctor's surgery. So we have in Stradbroke and Laxfield friendly taxi service, so people actually volunteer to take people to the doctors, and they come to hospital as well. So I know that goes across the district in many villages. Yes.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Carter?
I'm just wondering, when you meet with this, are you including a certain... you said you've got a friendly taxi company, but there's B service...
It's volunteers. So it would be people who have time on their hands, and they actually get paid petrol, but they've got time on their hands and they volunteer.
So the local charity B service and other type charities, are they being reached out to who might be able to offer additional services with the volunteer drivers?
I don't know. I could find out for you. Oh.
Councillor Fleming, would you like to come in?
Thank you. I mean, I might just come in and add to that, based on work that the Health Scrutiny Committee is doing with the county, because I think we're aware that there is a mismatch between the need to get around and the fact that rural transport services are reducing. I can confirm that the health service and CCGs are actually working with community transport providers in Suffolk to try to get something set up to work. It's not there yet, it's an early stage, but particularly I think Councillor Flatton's referring to the use of community cars, which they aren't inexpensive. That's one of the problems. They're more expensive than the bus, but it's something that's very much the focus of the Scrutiny Committee and that we are working on.
Are there any further questions?
Chair, I was actually referring to people with private cars. We have a network of people who have time on their hands. They use their own cars, but they do get so much a mile for taking people to hospital and to doctors, to dentists, etc. But that's like a good neighbourhood team.
Are there any further questions? So moving on to CMU4, Cabinet Member for Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement. Are there any questions? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. With regards to communications, on section 6 on page 43, I read in the East Anglian Daily Times on the 20th of September that we're examining how existing logos for both councils are used, and we're involving councillors from all parties in looking at that. I haven't heard anything about that, so I just wondered if the leader could explain what work is going on with regards to logos. Thank you, Chair.
Our comms leader will be contacting Mid Suffolk group leaders to set up a working party, and that is due to start shortly.
Is there any further questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Geek.
I'm very sorry, but I couldn't hear a word of that last answer. I don't know if your microphone was working, but I honestly, I know I'm a long way away from you, but could we have it again? Sorry to take up time.
That's not a problem. Our comms team leader is setting up a meeting with Mid Suffolk group leaders to set up a working party, and that is about to start imminently.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Stringer, did you have a question?
To do. Thank you very much, Chair. During the recent changes in bin rounds, there are a number of citizens and customers that contacted me, and the calls were just ringing out and not getting there. How do they figure in these statistics?
That's a tricky one. When somebody rings our customer access point in Stowmarket, if they select option to go through to waste, then it will go through to the waste team rather than going to the Stowmarket team. And they calculate their own figures. If somebody can't get through and they then ring back and ring through to the Stowmarket team and select another option in the hope they'll get to speak to somebody else, then they will be calculated in these figures.
So in this data, if I rang the call centre and it was answered within 30 seconds, and I was then put through to the waste department, and I then sat there for 15 minutes and then the phone wasn't answered, that gets put into the 52% that were answered within 30 seconds.
I assume so.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Wellham?
Thank you, Chair. We talk here about the equality and diversity policy and the mandatory councillor equality induction training. I attended a session, there was hardly anybody there. If it's mandatory, what's being done to make sure everybody does attend?
Yes, I must admit, the one I attended, I can't remember if it was the same one as you, but that wasn't well attended. The onus is on all group leaders to make sure that their group members attend the training.
Are there any other questions? So moving on to CMU5, Cabinet Member for Economic Growth. Councillor Mattison, I believe you have a question.
Thank you. Yes, two, unfortunately. Yes, the first one, it's now 2.5 years since the council bought Paddock House in Eye. during which time it's become an eyesore deeply resented by local people, as they tell me. When will the necessary management resource be available to develop it?
Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, further to the original public consultation by the Council in spring of 2018, the community of Eye made a number of representations to the late Councillor Michael Burke and officers of the Council. Following the review of these comments, it became apparent that the planned proposed development of the site was not supported by the community due to the aspiration to gain a larger provision of public open space. Continued dialogue and consultation with key community members and the Town Council has been undertaken, with new schemes created. The Council has recently been able to agree a scheme with Eye Town Council that will be submitted to planning by the end of the year, and the expected development of the site to take place by the end of 2020. To answer the question with regards to resource, we can confirm that throughout the process, the appropriate resources have been provided, and this will continue until the development is completed. The delivery of this complex housing site is important, but the most important outcome for Eye is delivering the best development for the town. And I would add there that the ward member, Councillor Gould, has been very, very instrumental in working with community and Town Council and officers here.
Councillor Gould, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to express my appreciation to colleague councillors and indeed to officers who have worked through quite a number of permutations in an attempt to achieve the best scheme for this important site, which sits in the heart of the conservation area in Eye. And the position we've now reached actually delivers the community aspirations of preserving a green space, which actually is going to be in the care of the community, and also 16 affordable homes, both of which are much needed within the town. So I know it's taken a while. We put the scheme, we discussed the scheme at a well-attended meeting of the Town Council last week, and it's much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. Can I express my disappointment that the Cabinet member who lives in Stowmarket got the spelling of John Peel wrong? That's a bit disappointing. But my question is, how does a partnership with St Peter's Church in Sudbury help Mid Suffolk District Council achieve their strategic economic ambitions?
It's a very good question, yes, certainly, and one I picked up myself, I have to say.
Councillor Eppingham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Brewster for his fine report. And there's a lot going on the economic front, and all very positive. Just wonder if Councillor Brewster would like to comment on what we're doing in terms of employment, particularly for young people and particularly those that are not in education, employment or training.
Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Eppingham. What are we doing? Well, I was in the mix. I've been in the mix in Stowmarket certainly twice in about the last 4 or 5 weeks. And the last time I received a report from Dave Pepper, who is the Chief Exec of the mix now. You may remember that we used to support the MIGO work when it was happening. And following on from that, it all petered out. The county did it in a different way. But we have continued to work with the mix on supporting the young children, or the young people, I should say, who are in sort of the neat situation. The information I was given on my last visit was that in this last period, they received 70 referrals. Of that 70 referrals, 22 after the initial conversation didn't return. And of the others who went right the way through the process and the training, 33%, I think just over 33%, are now in full-time employment. So that I believe to be an extremely good result with youngsters who have those sort of difficulties. By the way, sorry, if I can just add to that, they not only work in Stowmarket, they are working into the district as well. And I think they're very keen, from what I get to understand, and it's really nothing to do with us, but they're also keen to start looking at the Baber district to see what they can do there as well, which would obviously be on Baber district's funding.
Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. You mentioned various bits of work within this, but Stowmarket and Mid Suffolk have got a lot of creative industry in our district and a lot of small companies. Can I ask what work is going on to kind of provide workspace for the creative industry, and particularly live-work spaces within Stowmarket? Thank you.
There is a lot of work which is really just about being started. Our new Assistant Director, Fiona, is doing some fantastic work with that, and we realise that it does need progressing, and it will be progressed. I'm not sure that I don't know if Fiona can help me here, but if she can, I'd be very grateful.
Yes, so... Sorry, been told I have to stand up. There's quite a few things that we are doing, which I think at this moment in time it would be quite difficult to share, but I'm hopeful that we will be able to bring some information back in the not too distant future. One thing I will say is that we are working with a range of private sector partners and other public sector partners regarding work on technology hubs or innovation clusters, which is something that I'm very passionate about, and I've been working with Gerald on. There's some really good suggestions around how we can engage better, particularly the tech side and the number of small SMEs that we have in Stowmarket and the surrounding areas around the tech industries. So we're doing that, but also on the sort of creative side, I think part of our visioning work has identified Stowmarket as being a creative and cultural leader, if you like, and we are certainly very keen through our town centre visioning work to expand some of that, and work will start to evolve around some distinct projects later in the year.
Councillor Field, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just noticed in paragraph 3.8 the reference to local heat networks, and speaking from the pain of trying to get the one near the energy from waste plant going, which has been an abysmal failure. Just wondering what sort of things you have in mind. Are these sustainable networks based on ground source heat, and in what sort of areas of the district?
Thank you very much. I knew this one was likely to come up. We're certainly looking at areas like Gateway 14 for it, and to work on that. But again, this is one that Fiona is really working on at the moment, and she's got much more knowledge of it than I have at this moment in time. So, Fiona, please.
We are looking at Gateway 14 at the moment. Obviously, it's a very big site. It would be good to think that that site could be served through a mix of local energy, including heat. Heat networks, I think kind of heat networks we're talking about are ones that serve sort of, it's that infrastructure first approach. So it's getting the heat network in so that it can serve a wide range of development. It's much more difficult to do it retrospectively. But yes, we're talking about different sources of heat, so ground source, water source, biomass, but serving a whole development as opposed to individual buildings.
Councillor Passmore.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
I was very pleased to see in the paper there, Gerard, the establishment, the support the council's given to the Central Suffolk, or whatever it's called, new business chamber. And it will be very interesting to hear what sort of views they have at a local level as to how we encourage economic growth on a sustainable basis, of course, for employment. But one of the things I did want to just raise, I don't know whether members are aware, but, and you'll know all about this, Gerard, the Suffolk Growth Group, where £1.8 billion notes of yours and my money is spent on goods and services across the public sector in Suffolk. And one thing I've been pushing for personally for many years, ever since I was first elected, which is longer ago, almost when Keith was in Stowe Upland, is to make sure we really do seriously look at the economic and social impacts of how we spend taxpayers' money in order, for example, that in construction projects, is that part of the condition that we have a certain number of apprentices? We do what we can to rehabilitate offenders or those who've had no opportunity in life. And I think the same, if you look at West Suffolk Hospital, for example, they, I know, source nearly all of their food from local suppliers rather than great big multinationals that import it from God knows where all over the world. And I think there are really good things that we could do collectively. We're going to have more impact by working across the public sector, and supporting local businesses, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I just wondered whether you would be an enthusiast for that.
Yes, I am.
Good.
Very, very much so. You know, the more that we can do locally and source locally, then the better it is, and that supports our economy and Suffolk economy as well. So, yeah, whatever we can do to enhance and grow that is absolutely commendable.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Carter.
Yes, I've actually got a question. That's a question. On 3.1, Visioning for Prosperity, regarding the Stowmarket Steering Group, I was just wondering how it is possible for members to have input into a steering group.
The steering group has basically been set up. Obviously, there are a number of, well, it's for business as well, but also there's various representatives on from district, from county, right the way across the board. So there is a good feeling of input to it.
Councillor Carter, do you want to come back?
Yeah, but could we be informed who those members are, please?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that one.
But could we be informed of who these people are, please?
Yes, indeed. I'm sure to forget a name now if I say it, so what I'll do, I'll circulate it to you.
Councillor Matheson, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. This is my other written question submitted in due time. Will you publish all Mid Suffolk written and verbal input to the local economic partnership when they were preparing and drafting the Norfolk and Suffolk local industrial strategy, including the full text, dates and who was involved?
In principle, yes, we can. We can definitely provide the responses we have made to the LEP. Sorry. However, as a lot of this information from the LEP itself is from the LEP itself, we will need to speak with them first before we can release the information, as a matter of courtesy and probably etiquette as well.
Are there...
Yes, supplementary to that, and for members that might have missed it, this stemmed from a paper that went to the Cabinet, the most recent Cabinet. And so my supplementary question really is, why was none of that information about our input to the process put in front of the Cabinet?
I think you have to understand that this technically is a LEP government document. There was no emphasis on district councils or county council to actually be part of it. But if we hadn't taken the step to be part of it, then we would have probably missed out in future times. The economies team were working extremely hard, right up almost to the last minute, on getting this information in. And certainly our Assistant Director had tried to get some further information in, but the LEP were working to basically a government template, and that wasn't looking for the same minutiae of detail, because that detail actually sits underneath this overarching and headline document. So some of that stuff we had been told that, you know, it wouldn't go forward because government wouldn't accept that at this time. But the information comes up underneath it.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, I think that the essential problem is, do you not think that the county and various districts declaring a climate emergency should have been recognised and in what the LEP have produced?
I think that is the information that comes up to support this document from underneath.
Right, moving on. CMU6, Cabinet Member for Environment. Councillor Pratt, I believe you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. So, regarding waste and recycling route changes, the residents from the ward of Battersford and Ringshaw have often aired their concerns and frustrations over the delays. And I've often been asked the question as to what the objective was behind the changing of the crew, which inevitably led to the discarding of years of worth of local knowledge of those round routes. So I will leave the next question in regards to the investment or the potential to invest in electric-powered refuse lorries to my colleague, Councillor Mellon. But yeah, if we could understand better why the team change was necessary, that would be great.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor. The change in routes that went on was quite substantial. 100 new routes were formed, and inevitably the same crews couldn't go on doing the same routes, or there would have been no change. Therefore, many of the routes had no new crew on them. I would like to firstly apologise that two people, if anyone, for the record, for those people whose bins were not collected in a timely manner, because I understand how very frustrating that is, recycling and black waste in particular. And I also have had people complain that bins were not collected several times. And I have to say that whereas most of the collection has gone very well, and I think the audit and overview scrutiny committee looked at that last week. And overall, I think the audit committee, although the informal recommendations have not been published, I think the audit committee did commend the waste organisation for the good work. Inevitably, it has not been perfect. New crews had to be brought in from other parts of the country to fill in temporarily because the new route change happened during a holiday. Some crews were on holiday to make sure there was cover. Yes, some things went wrong, but I think the rate of pickup now is getting much better and is almost back to normal. So Serco have tried to match the areas with the old crew as much as they can, but that's where we are. So I think it's on an upward trajectory.
Councillor Pratt.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. Another question leading from this, from another constituent in Great Bryce was regarding the saving, if you know the exact figure or even a ballpark of switching contractors. Thank you.
We did not switch contractors, and if there was any saving, then I would have to refer that to get back to you, because I'm not aware that there was any.
Councillor Pratt, do you have any further questions? Councillor Mellon?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I had a question, and Councillor Pratt also had one about shifting to freighters powered by electricity, and I'm grateful to the answer we've received in the papers. But I'm aware of other places in the country, particularly in Sheffield and in Westminster, where they are using or conducting a trial of electric waste collection vehicles. And the sort of strapline to that is waste collection powered by the waste we've collected. And since we're turning waste into electricity here in Suffolk, wouldn't it be wonderful in the future if we could have waste vehicles powered by the waste that they're collecting? Second to that, though, there has been an ongoing trial of biogas fuelled freighters, which has been going on, organised by the Department of Transport since 2017 in various places around the country. And I wonder whether we could have one of those trial freighters here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, and it's an excellent question. I think our provider, Serco, is looking hard at opportunities to trial some innovations in waste collection technology. Viola, I believe, are the firm that are leading with the Sheffield and Westminster waste trials. Now, to date, the electric-powered vehicles don't have a very large range. I think the maximum is about 60 miles, which may work in the city of Sheffield, but it doesn't work well in rural areas. So more work needs to be done to combat that problem. There's also the question that I believe the Sheffield models were updated as opposed to being new vehicles. There have been trials. I've actually looking into this with our waste team, and we're very keen to advance this and to try to get Suffolk involved in a pilot. So I think my answer is watch this space.
Councillor Mellon.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I did have another question on a separate issue. This council declared a climate emergency at our last meeting in July, and at that point we stated that a task force would start work in September. But that doesn't seem to have happened. We're approaching the end of September, and I understand that it's now going to be in October. I did look up the definition of an emergency, just to double check. And the Oxford English Dictionary says an emergency is a serious, unexpected and dangerous situation requiring immediate action. I'm not sure whether our lack of action so far sort of fits in with the idea of an emergency. How soon will the group be meeting, and when can we get to work? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The task force will meet on the 9th of October, and quite a lot of work has already started. We have had some county-wide meetings with our local authority cabinet members to coordinate the work that we do so that it makes sense. What we didn't want to do is to start work before people were ready and waste people's time and so forth. Our terms of reference also need to include the biodiversity aspects of climate change. We've got a draft ready to bring to Cabinet and to the task force in October now that incorporates both these important agendas. And I think that the work of the task force is going to be, going on from now. And as I say, the work behind the scenes is already being done.
Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to come back on one of the questions and also, or two of the questions, and also come up with a new one. The moving to electrified freighters. Yes, it's a bit of a challenge for range, but The freighters here do round about that amount of mileage a day. But what's interesting is 2 of the trials at the moment are putting more life into end-of-life vehicles, therefore making the vehicles extend their life beyond 7 years. But also what's interesting is the cost savings. Freighters cost about 270 quid a day to fuel. If you can electrify them, that brings that cost down to less than 50 a day. So could I urge that we look at this as an invest-to-save model, not just to save money, but also help save our emissions? I hear the explanation about how we needed to create new rounds, given that you have got an expanding population and new houses. I totally get that. The bit I don't understand is why did we then construct rounds that lost every scrap of local knowledge from some of those already on the vehicles? If you've got 4 people in a team, surely you could have left at least one of that team back in that community to share that local knowledge. One new question is under the depot, 4.2. It says the current depot is working at capacity because of the housing growth. Actually, that's not all of the truth. Some of our officers that aren't in that discipline are actually using the facilities at the depot as a drop-in office. So can I ask, when is it we're going to get more office capacity within Mid Suffolk?
I think we are looking for space, and when that will be, I'll have to get back to you.
Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. To switch to the subject of building control that you have here, it's obviously excellent to see us working with the county's company Concertus on that operation. That's great. But a little concerned that the next paragraph down talks about a demise of one of our competitors and 150 projects being handed back to the council, which at first sight looks excellent. You know, a win for us at someone else's pain, but was concerned to be told that the problem in that industry is a colossal increase in professional indemnity insurance, and wondered whether that's been taken into account in our delight in winning the new projects.
I would hope that it has, but again, I can confirm exactly how professional indemnity has been taken into account. I'll have to get back to you on that because I don't know.
Councillor Tratt.
Thank you. Just going back to the National Waste Strategy. So residents from my ward have also questioned the traceability of plastic waste that we collect to be recycled. We were wondering how the council holds the contractor to accountable for where our plastic ends up, so the end point, and how it is recycled in the end product. What is the mechanism specifically for holding the contractor to account, and what is the regularity of that inquiry? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you probably know, the disposition of waste and recycled materials, it's a county-wide operation, and the Suffolk Waste Partnership manages that. I sit on the Suffolk Waste Partnership Board. We've had our first meeting, and we did discuss this topic because it's been quite topical with the possibility of English waste ending up on the shores of Indonesia. That's not something any of us wants to see. The information about how our recyclable material is actually managed is on the website, but I will read out an extract here for the benefit of the room. Exported materials are sold to Environment Agency accredited and licensed facilities abroad. They also go to England, of course, but when they are exported, obviously they become an end-of-waste product. This specifies no further onward trading as waste. An end-of-waste product refers to waste which has been reprocessed, often to produce a pellet or a flake, which can be reused as a recyclable material. Viridor, who are the waste contractor tasked with sorting and selling Suffolk's household recyclables, operate an audit process with UK authorities and the Environment Agency before recovered materials are shipped. Further auditing is completed before the materials are sold on to reprocessors abroad to ensure the supply chain is verified in advance of implementation. Viridor are committed to the highest standards of business and ethical conduct, and they demonstrate expertise in this area. Right, I realise that's the answer I have to give you. I realise that once waste goes abroad, the process is not perfect, and I think we are all concerned about, some of the waste that may slip through the cracks, and this is something that we will be following up on.
Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for sharing that very valuable information indeed. As you say, mistakes have happened through the current process that we have in the past, and you referenced a documentary that raised the public awareness about it. What exactly do we know where the waste is, where this plastic waste is, at this moment in time that we are shipping out? Does the council have access to this data? Does it know? Can it trace where that waste is? And what suggestions are being raised to stop, as you say, the plastic falling through the cracks of this process and ending up in the ocean or in the middle of the rainforest in Malaysia? Thank you.
I think the waste that we put through Viridor, I'm very confident in their processes and that they operate for us in the county, an excellent programme. But to answer your question more fully, I would like to, refer to our officers. Can I refer to Cassandra Clements to fill in a bit?
Hi there. I can certainly get you a more thorough answer via the Suffolk Waste Partnership about exactly where the waste is and what the process is and where it goes in the world. What I will say, just on the point about waste slipping through the gaps, quite often when you see documentaries and they show waste ending up in areas that it shouldn't be, it is probably not from the normal waste stream. So there are many other ways that waste gets out into our oceans and into countries it shouldn't be, onto our shorelines. And it is highly unlikely that it's through our domestic waste stream. We are exceptionally confident, as Councillor Fleming said, with Viridor. Their audits are exceptional, but I can certainly get you some further data to help reassure you on that point.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor.
Thank you. Question, but first of all a comment. We are scrutinising the issue of waste at the county tomorrow, and I'll try and remember the questions that were tabled to make sure they get answered. Certainly that issue of where does plastic go is one question we have asked and got an answer. My question really, or my comment here is, I'm looking at the changes to animal welfare licensing legislation and the obvious training of our staff well in front of the scheduled time, which is great to see. I just wondered whether it's possible that the case studies to demonstrate competence could involve the very large number of horses that are kept in Bramford in a way that concerns greatly people who are interested in equine welfare. It might be something that we could deploy some effort on without, as part of a process that we have to perform in any case.
Yes, I'm not sure that really comes under the waste or I hope not anyway, the environment agenda. I think as a district, we should be aware of the fate of those horses, and it's probably is a standards issue, but I will take that on board and follow it up.
Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested to hear that the waste
issues have been scrutinised, and so I wanted to bring this up. Kind of a personal query, really, but I'm sure it's of interest to many constituents. Is recently the recycling of Tetra Packs was withdrawn from the domestic collections, and this comes at a time when more and more people are choosing alternative milks, which come in these Tetra Pak paper plastic cartons. So I'm just a general inquiry, is it wise to be disincentivising recycling and enforcing people to go to the local waste depot, making it harder for people to recycle these items when they're probably on the increase? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Tetra Paks are troublesome, as you know, because they're dual materialed, and the technology does not really work well to recycle them at the moment. But I think it's something that most recycling processors are working on. In a rather odd sense, it almost makes more sense to burn them in the energy for waste facility and get the benefit of the heat and power that's generated, because the amount of energy it takes to successfully and economically recycle a Tetra Pak is very, very small.
Okay, we're going to move on soon. Is it a quick one?
So I was just wondering what does happen to the existing Tetra Packs that are taken to the waste depot at the moment? Do they go into that burning process?
The public shouldn't be putting Tetra Paks in their recyclable waste at the moment.
At the waste depot, there is a container for Tetra Paks. So the question is, what's currently happening to those?
I know what happens to those. I'll have to get back to you.
One more for me, the Councillor Pratt or Councillor Carter. And I think, actually, Daniel, you've had plenty, so Councillor Carter.
Going on another cheerful subject, but going back to the Tree for Life scheme, which is wonderful that we do give a tree to birth new babies. We're not all having children, but one thing that does touch us all is our mortality, death. Would it not be a wonderful scheme to have told it's cheerful, would it not be an idea to allow for, to remember people by actually, for deaths, to actually allow to plant a tree in remembrance?
Grow your own coffin.
Well, I'll start planting now. But would that be a nice way?
It's quite an interesting suggestion, but I'm not sure if it would give our council very good sort of public press. However, to sort of, by all means, do, plan for it. So, I mean, I don't mean that in any morbid way, but yes, it's not a bad idea. We'll consider it.
Okay, Councillor Pratt, very quickly.
Right, yeah, I'll try and make this as quickly as possible. In relation to the climate emergency that we recently made and the environment, the District Council has supported Suffolk County Council and Ipswich Borough Council's consultation for the Ipswich Northern route. I put the question to the full council in our previous meeting whether the District Council could withhold its support for the Ipswich Northern route in the light of the climate emergency. The response came that this was the final decision for the County Council to decide. However, we've had protests. This route could potentially rip up swathes of beautiful countryside in the north of Ipswich, including, especially if it goes through villages like Grunsborough. It will contribute huge amounts of CO2 to our atmosphere. Can the District Council guarantee that that in the end it might consider pulling its support for the Ipswich Northern route and consider in real terms alternative options with the County Council, such as improving the bus services, building purpose-built cycle routes and improving connections to main transport hubs? Thank you.
Councillor Fleming, would you like to quickly answer?
Yes, the recent, there was, obviously, you know, there's recent consultation about the possible routes. This is at a very early stage, and what, if anything, is taken forward will depend on the strategic outline business case, which is yet to be developed. So we have not taken a position, this council, on the route. That is for the future, and will not be done until a finalised business case is before us and we've had proper time to consider it.
Right, moving on. CMU 7, Cabinet Member for Finance. Councillor Warboys, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will have to rephrase my question because I have some further information. With respect to the declaration of a climate emergency, what assessments are we making of investments made on behalf of the district councils, such as the General Fund, with regards to progress towards making the councils carbon neutral by 2030?
Councillor Whitehead, do you want to answer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just before I do answer, I'd just like to bring members' attention to an update within my report for paragraph 4.5. I'll do it now whilst I remember. At the time of writing my report, we anticipated the review of council tax reduction scheme would lead to a report going to Cabinet in October. Now, since going to press, further detailed analysis has revealed that too many residents would be negatively impacted by the proposed changes. So the decision has been taken not to pursue any changes for April 2020, and instead the Shared Revenues Partnership will continue to look at ways to reduce the administrative overhead of the scheme. Now turning to the particular answer to your question, my response is set out there on the paper. I don't see the point in reading it out word for word as it's already set out there, but if you had any supplementary question, I'd be pleased to take it.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Ebert.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Councillor Whitehead what is the current level of the Growth and Efficiency Fund, please?
Thank you, Councillor Uben. The details of the Growth and Efficiency Fund at the end of June were reported in the Q1 monitoring, but having been given advance warning of your question, I've requested and received an update from beyond that point from the finance team. The present balance on the GEF, after accounting for all anticipated spend on already started projects, is 8.894 million. However, we're setting aside from that another 2,575,000 for the Regal Theatre project. We're allocating 3 million for the Strategic Investment Fund to be available as and when needed. And we still anticipate spending 223,000 on a battery storage scheme at the Leisure Centre. Taking all that into account, that would still leave a very healthy balance of about £3.1 million remaining on our Growth and Efficiency Fund.
Please, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Given that, thank you very much for your answer, Councillor Whitehead, and thank you for bringing the figures to the meeting. Given that you're saying that you're setting aside about 3 million for Strategic Investment Fund, is that right? Plus 3.1 million remaining, that's about 6 million available. And I was wondering that we've had talk about a local energy network, also about live work spaces in Stowmarket, and potentially an office in our district. And I just wondered if you'd consider any of these 3 projects. Thank you.
Sorry, my dictation wasn't quite quick enough to get all 3 projects down, but certainly with the 3.1 million and plus, as you say, the 3 million which is there, should things such as like the older building or the John Peel Centre come forward, there's money there ready for it and an early approval. But so you said a local energy network.
Spaces and potentially an office in our district.
Yeah. I think those are 3 things that could sensibly be looked at, and so, yeah, we'll take those away.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. In your report, you mentioned that there was poor attendance at the recent finance training. Now, I did actually come to the finance training here this morning, but because for me to come into Ipswich for an hour or an hour and a half takes over 4 hours out of my day, and presumably there are other councillors in similar sorts of situation, has there been any move towards putting councillor briefings as a webinar so that we don't have to spend 2.5 hours getting here for a 1 hour meeting?
That's probably above my pay grade, the wider scope of that, but I know all these presentations have been circulated after the meeting so that all members can see them, but perhaps our leader or our CEO might want to add to that webinar side.
I can add to that briefly, just from the perspective of we all have Skype. It's perfectly possible to deliver these things by Skype if that is acceptable to councillors. Clearly, you need to make sure that you've got access to that technology at home, assuming that's where you're going to be, but that's perfectly possible to do, yes.
Councillor Mattison.
Thank you, Chair. Not entirely sure where to ask this question. The Audit and Standards Committee meeting in, I think it was July, I wasn't able to attend, and I have asked, I think twice now, whether I might have a copy of the draft minutes so that I could keep up, as everybody knows, I'm very vigilant in wanting to know all the things that are going on in all the committees that I'm on. This has been declined. I wonder whether either you or the chair of the committee or somebody could actually, make draft minutes available. Bearing in mind, I think we've cancelled the next meeting as well. I'd like to see the detail of what went on, basically.
Yeah, Councillor Muller's going to answer that.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Matheson. I'm sure it will be possible to provide draft minutes. Would Catherine, would that be possible? I would have thought so. To Councillor Matheson.
I'll probably need to defer to my colleagues in committee services as they obviously take the notes from those meetings.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Matheson?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Norris, did you have a question?
Thank you. Just a quick question. On page 56, paragraph 4.6, within the text there and the heading above it, it refers to 2019-20 budget and medium-term financial strategy. Should this not be 2020/21?
There's always one typo that slips through.
So moving on, CMU8, Cabinet Member for Housing, Councillor Mansell, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I did send in 3 questions which have been tabled on the paper, so I'm not going to read them through, but I do have a couple of follow-on questions, if I may, on the first 2 items. My first question was about the need for more social rent housing, and I had a response which tells me that we have delivered a total of 99 new homes, which include social affordable rent and shared ownership. But of the 99, can you tell me how many are social rent? That's my first comeback question. I'll wait for the response and I'll go on.
Councillor Mansell, I haven't got a breakdown of which ones are social, I'm afraid. Yes.
My second question was regarding the formation of a member sounding panel, which was agreed, I thought it was agreed, when the Joint Housing Board was disbanded a couple of years ago, but we only seem to be having a paper on the possible member sounding board. I just wondered why it was only possible that we were going to get a member sounding board when it had been agreed, I thought, a couple of years ago.
I'll bring it up at my cabinet briefing and we'll see what we can do, and I'll email you.
Councillor Turner, I believe you have a question.
Data to explain this huge rise, which might help prevent future increases in the future.
There is, yeah. Said you put the claims that are coming together into one universal credit claim, but are there any measures to bring it down to help people on those benefits come off it?
Okay.
You've answered the question as in it's managed migration where the claimants transfer from existing benefits or taxes onto universal credit and you expect it to go up, but are there any measures in place to help the claimants come off it?
That's a Gavin. Is that okay, Gavin?
Thank you.
Thank you. In response, I think the managed migration is from existing benefits onto universal credit. I think your question is in relation to getting people off universal credit. So obviously that's as a result of getting into work and removing the need from the benefits. We do work closely with the Job Centre, working with them and their officers to support individuals in terms of budgeting advice and other support. And I'm sure colleagues in our economic development team are doing everything that they can to increase the number of opportunities in terms of jobs.
Are there any further questions? Oh, Councillor Warboys.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't a written question. At one of the members' briefs for allocation and homelessness, one of the slides showed that people were moving disproportionately out of Colchester and Ipswich compared to the number of people moving in. For example, over 140 households moved out of Ipswich and less than 10 moved in. The implication is that the households have moved out of Ipswich into Mid Suffolk, East Suffolk, Braintree and Bayberg. If this is so, the ripple effect has surely huge implications for households moving from an urban situation to a rural area, in particular the need for access to public transport and work. What measures are in place to investigate and analyse this movement? In particular, the impact on local communities where locals are maybe finding it difficult to find housing within their own communities. I need to rephrase that perhaps.
I think I'll turn that over to Gavin for you.
Thank you. Obviously, in relation to Gateway to Home Choice, it's a sub-regional choice-based letting system involving a number of partners. Obviously, the benefits of that is it gives flexibility to move or people to move from borough or district, whether that be to be closer to family or closer to work. There is close monitoring of the migration in and out of districts, and where it is deemed that there has been significant migration, then there can be restrictions put on the choice-based letting system in terms of allocating properties to those with a local connection or a local need. I think that's obviously something that was constantly monitored. Is that helpful?
Yes. Well, thank you, Officer, for that. I was just wondering whether there was any actual explanation for this migratory movement. Was it just for work or?
Happy to go away. I think your questions are as a result of a recent member briefing in relation to Gateway to Home Choice and homelessness. Happy to go away and look at some of the reasons for that movement. My initial assumptions are it's to do with being closer to work or being closer to family, but I'm happy to go away and find out some more details.
Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question about the mobility scooter policy. It only affects a few people, a small proportion of the people, but it is absolutely crucial to them. And I've been called a couple of times along to people who are really worried about this. They really don't know what's going on. The sort of thing is, one of the residents has a scooter which presently he charges up in the shared area. Have these people been visited? Do they know what's going on? His other concern, or another concern within within the Jubilee Court is that if this person, who's quite young but not very mobile, if his is the only scooter that's accommodated in an outside charging area, and some of the others within the housing scheme find a need for a mobility scooter, what do they do? One of the suggestions was they might have to move to somewhere where there is a vacant scooter charging point. Well, surely that's not the answer. So have the residents been told what's going on a one-to-one basis, because there's not a huge number of them? Do the managers of the housing schemes know what's going on? And I see the policy has been approved, and then it's going to be made available to Cabinet for their information. So somebody has presumably approved it without Cabinet knowing about it. Am I right?
Okay. Our hands are tied on this one. The law is that the mobility scooters have to be restricted to certain areas because they are dangerous if they go up. And if you watch a video of it, it's quite frightening. And if it's in blocking an area, we're going to be all over the papers. You know, how did they let this happen? We're following the law that has been put in place by the government. We can't do any more than that. Lee has had consultations with different people about it and explained the situation. But as you say, there's not many of them, and we're just carrying out the law.
If I can come back, yeah, I mean, I understand it's not good if the thing explodes in the shared area, but this guy was told, I don't know if it's still the advice, that he can charge it up in his flat. Well, but he can't get to his flat because the corridor and the doorway are too narrow. But surely that's just as dangerous.
Councillor Carter.
Yes, I do find this rather confusing, considering it is only affecting at the moment mobility scooters. And if you actually did realise that any mobility, any chair, or they all have the same battery, they all have the same issues. And you can also set fire to your house by plugging in a mobile phone. So I'm very confused how it can only affect mobility scooters, that we are only enforcing that you can't charge up a mobility scooter indoors. And currently this is only being implemented on sheltered schemes. Some of the most desperate individuals in a sheltered accommodation. We're not currently, thankfully, not looking at doing this onto our socially rented houses, because otherwise I would be in stuffed up, because I have my own scooter as well, which I charge indoors. About a year ago, we were visited by some members of the regarding the issue of mobility scooters through Mid Suffolk Disability Forum that I'm vice chair of. And we were told that the council were looking into external mobility, putting points outside for charging of mobility scooters as shelters, and that we were going to be kept in the loop and for further plans to be made about this. This is over nearly 2 years ago now. We've heard nothing about it, and I'd personally quite like to know.
Thank you. I'll just pass you over to Gavin, and he might have a little bit more information because I only took this post up in May, so perhaps he knows a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in response to some of those questions, and I may not have all of the answers here this evening, the mobility scooter policy has been agreed and adopted following a recent consultation, and I've done that as the Assistant Director for Housing. I did bring the policy to administration for information purposes only. What I will endeavour to do is ensure that a copy of that policy is disseminated to all members, and to provide you with a summary as to where we are in terms of that planning, both in relation to the installation of external mobility scooter stores and the process of talking to individual residents and the solutions that we've found for each one of those. I think it's always difficult. It's like roads and the number of cars on roads nowadays, some of these sheltered housing schemes weren't designed for the number of mobility scooters being used. We did have a fire in a very sheltered housing scheme last year. Fortunately, there weren't any injuries as a result. But through that piece of work, we identified a number of mobility scooters being stored in communal areas. Well, it's not just the case that the battery might cause a fire, but they also pose a hazard if the corridors are full of smoke. So we do have to find practical solutions to these problems, and that's what we're endeavouring to do. But I'll ensure that all members are updated with the results of the consultation and where we are.
Thank you. Moving on, CMU9, Cabinet Member for Planning. I believe Councillor Mellon, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, I expect members will be aware that the Council received, along with several other councils, a letter from the environmental legal team, Client Earth, regarding our emerging local plan complying with current UK environment legislation, and that letter requested a response by the 28th of October. So my question was about whether has a response been drafted, and how did this answer the questions raised by Client Earth. I'm grateful to the response that's been received in the papers, but I'm just concerned because the joint local plan, we're all very keen to see that come into place for various reasons, including slowing down windfall planning sites in our wards, I'm sure, but it's not going to happen until next year. And it seemed to me that the letter indicated some actions that we could take now in order to meet this kind of obligation of being net zero carbon by 2050. So I wondered whether anything in that letter was helpful in terms of feeding into our current planning strategy. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You'll see the response on the back page of the handout. Several other councils received the same legal letter from Client Earth, many in fact. We're therefore working in conjunction with these other councils through the local government association, and it will be through them that we draft the reply. I believe at the moment it's with the local government association's legal team who are getting advice about the response we should give. That's as much as I can tell you at this stage. I've no idea when they will have that answer for us.
Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just with regard to the draft joint local plan, in the background to the joint local plan, the text says to support the Ipswich Northern Route transport project and the strengthening of Ipswich and the surrounding area as the key economic driver of the county, and that is in the objectives. So either we are supporting it as this says or we're not. I would quite appreciate a definitive answer. Thank you very much, Chair.
Just to assist, obviously that document you referred to is subject to consultation. That consultation's been ongoing and will then be reviewed. And clearly it would be wrong to not at least make mention of the fact that a potential is there in a draft local plan. But the answer you had earlier is absolutely the case, which is there is no strategic outline business case at this stage, and you cannot make a decision as a council as to whether you're in favour or against until you've seen that. That won't be available until the results of the most recent consultation have been completed, have been analysed, the strategic business case be completed and then put back in front of you. Clearly, in the meantime, you will also need to be reviewing your draft local plan as and when that comes back to you following that consultation as well.
Councillor Eburn, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. It's not in one of the policies for consultation, it's in the background information, and it doesn't actually say to consider whether to support the, to consider supporting. It's a definitive, and I think if it was one of the policy outcomes on which we are under which the consultation is currently running, then that would be a fair enough point, but it actually has a definitive statement, and so I would really question that does imply quite heavily that the council is in favour of supporting the Ipswich Northern route. Thank you, Chair.
I can probably only reiterate what you all know to be the case, which is you haven't voted to support the Ipswich Northern route. You haven't considered it. I'd refer you back to my previous answer. You may well do so in due course as to what you want to consider. You haven't done that yet, and you can be reassured you haven't.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. In my deliberations about the joint local plan consultation, I have been trying to get my head around the infrastructure delivery plan, which again does mention the Ipswich Northern Road. But I just wondered if there's any way members can have an input into the infrastructure delivery plan, which I have been told is a fluid document, because I feel that we haven't as yet. And is there any way that members can have an input into what is put in the infrastructure delivery plan?
Christine, do you want to step in?
Thank you. We've been working on the infrastructure delivery plan for quite some time. It's been a long process which has been worked on with the infrastructure providers. The important thing is that this is evidence and it's based on factual matters, which we have to test against capacity and deficit. And it is a constantly changing dynamic because decisions are made all the time at planning committee which change the infrastructure requirement in localities, which we then have to factor in. What I would say to anybody is if you have any concerns about what is in the document, then please come and talk and we can deal with that.
Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. It was really a supplementary to Councillor Eburn. I just thought that it would be interesting to comment that I'd like to see a business plan which balances the climate emergency against the carbon dioxide emissions and particulates of the Ipswich Northern Relief Road.
Anyone got an answer for that? It's not really a question. Stringer.
In the sense that it can't really be done, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we're now out to public consultation on our joint local plan. One question I keep getting, and I would like your opinion on this, if when the heralded day comes when our local plan is policy, our joint local plan is then policy, what happens if a policy within the joint local plan is in conflict with a made neighbourhood plan?
That's a good question too. I say I'm not really very well
Dave, do you want Arthur to
supported
step in?
Sorry?
I can try and assist.
Will you?
I'll give you the answer that I believe to be true, but we'll go back and double check. My understanding is that the joint local plan once made supersedes any existing neighbourhood plans and therefore replaces them in that regard. Doesn't mean that they disappear entirely, but if there were a conflict, the most recent plan or adopted plan wins, so to speak. But if I'm not right, we will double check to make sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your report. I've noticed at the Planning Committee there's a worrying trend of some members never bothering to even send comment or attend the Planning Committee. Is there anything you think we can do about this? Because local ward members are meant to represent their wards.
I do find that disappointing myself. I think we can send a missive round to all members explaining that situation and encouraging them to do the courteous thing and at least indicate what their comments are and an apology for being unable to attend.
Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. This relates to paragraph 3.7. Given the number of neighbourhood plans that are now a material consideration with some statutory weight in planning decisions, what specific training are officers being given in applying these neighbourhood plans to planning applications?
I can't tell you what specific instructions they're being given. I would imagine they're very well aware of each neighbourhood plan and are aware that actually is the top level of policy that will be required to evaluate every planning application where neighbourhood plans exist. As I say, I feel a little thin on officer support this evening, so
Councillor
I can
Byrne,
find
Councillor Guthrie, I think, wants to make a point.
fine, if Councillor Guthrie wants to interject.
Thank you. I didn't want to particularly interject. I just put my hand up and was asked to do so. I must admit, at briefings, we have extremely in-depth conversations at briefings, and all the planning officers are very well aware of the neighbourhood plans, and we often discuss them in depth ourselves with them. So I think you'll find that they are very well aware of it. One other point. I don't know whether this is relevant or not either. And I don't think you can insist on it, but Councillor Hicks has brought up a problem of sadly people not turning up, which is a very valid point, or sending a report in. We are there to represent the people on our planning committee, so I do hope that people would be able to vote for or against something, and I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just comment on what Councillor Guthrie's just said. I think sometimes...
I don't actually know if that's appropriate. We're meant to be asking questions of the
Okay,
planning
I'll ask a question. I'll ask you then. Right. Do you not agree that sometimes the damage is done when the committee report becomes public? Because we had an example just the other week where the report or the item was withdrawn from a Stow Upland item that I was there for. It was withdrawn, and to a degree it was, or to a large degree, it was because the officer in writing the report hadn't taken due notice of the neighbourhood plan. So there's two things there. One is perhaps they don't have enough training, or they haven't got to grips with it. About members attending, I wonder if it's possible for a return to something that Councillor Barker used to do. He used to tip me off when there was 4 weeks before an item, others too, 4 weeks before an item was coming to committee. So and he said, oh, there's a list of what's going to come to committee, planning applications. So could we be given a bit more notice? Because there's on one occasion I only had about three or four days notice.
Yes, I'll take that one forward. I don't see why it shouldn't be done.
Councillor Stringer, quickly.
A 5-second question. In the spirit of trying to get those elected to represent the views of their constituents on planning committees, should we not reconsider whether county councillors should be allowed to speak at planning committees, when more and more highways issues and issues that surround the county council are becoming material considerations?
Yeah, let's leave that for now. I think that completes this item, and we're going to move to the item number 15, the motion on notice. So the motion on notice is received from Councillor Morrison.
Nearly right.
I would like to invite Councillor Morrison to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Did you know there are many machines that can extract greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and create oxygen? And what's more, they can build themselves. Of course, they are trees. And did you know the UK used to be a rainforest? It's kind of shocking to our ears because there's so little of it left. So I'm very happy to propose this motion. I'll assume that you've read the preamble, so I'll just read from the motion bullets themselves. As I say, on item 15. Number 1, the Council pledges to increase the district's tree cover indirectly through landscaping conditions on planning permissions, directly to strengthen and fill gaps in identified biodiversity corridors, directly by investing in land purchase targeting poor quality farmland where the open space survey for joint local plan has shown there are deficiencies, and directly, crucially, by allowing rewilding of some areas with the central idea that natural processes should be allowed to take their course. Number 2, officers will work with communities to identify opportunities for community woods and orchards, including via planning applications, the neighbourhood planning process and the joint local plan land allocations. There is a particular emphasis in the Charter for Trees, Woods and People that everyone should have access to woodland, so we should be working to achieve that. Number 3, Council pledges to increase support for the network of parish tree wardens, both through training and also material help with trees, stakes and guards. And finally, number 4, in addition, Council asks Cabinet to investigate possibilities for carbon offset scheme to fund forestation available alongside planning permissions to balance embodied emissions and offered more widely to other organisations. So I think this motion will help us do right by our ecosystem for future generations and enable us to show leadership in this area further. So thank you.
Could I have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to formally second this motion but reserve my right to speak on the matter. Thank you.
Technology always defeats me. Although I really do agree in the sentiment and the aims, the overall aims of this motion, it'd be mad not to. It makes sense, doesn't it, that we need more trees. So much sense that the government in May announced a new fund, which was the Urban Tree Challenge Fund, which allows us to have £10 million to basically plant 130,000 trees in the UK, specifically England, I think, over a 2-year period, which also feeds into the government's 25-year environmental plan. So everything you've stated in there is actually almost verbatim of what the government's already stated. So we're all in agreement. We definitely need to do it. Absolutely. However, I've got some concerns. Those concerns are that some of your points, the bullet points, impeach and probably encroach on planning policy. You also ask us to do things without investigation, and there's not enough information there about the resource cost, time, equipment and money and training. So there's not enough information for me to really support the motion, although I do support the general principle of it because it makes absolute sense. I would like to take this moment actually to encourage the member for the environment to look at that scheme specifically for our urban areas. So we've got a succession plan for the mature oaks and mature trees that surround our recreation park in Stowmarket as an example, because that needs to be done. And the great thing about this fund, although it's a challenge fund, which means that it has to have match funding, it means that we can get 2 for 1, which in my books is a really good thing and should be supported. So this is why we need more information and we need more investigation, perhaps by the task force, but specifically by the Cabinet and the Cabinet member for the environment. And until that's done, I don't think I can support the motion as laid out in your paper, specifically those bullet points.
Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you can imagine, I would, in support of this motion, one of the issues that we talk about a lot, and this is a growing concern for us, is mental health in young people, in the elderly, in people with disabilities, people like myself with the illnesses. And one of the things that has been shown to improve mental health is to have access to woodland. One of my colleagues earlier mentioned the Japanese particularly talk about bathing in forests in terms of just enveloping yourself in the ecosystem that is a woodland space. And I would really commend this motion to my colleagues of all Mid Suffolk District Councillors, because I really strongly believe that having access to woodland is a great thing for mental health, and not enough people have, and I think the district should be taking a lead to be able to ensure this is the case. Thank you very much.
Councillor Passmore.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I actually do agree to a large extent with Councillor Humphreys. I actually think this is certainly a wonderful sentiment. I absolutely agree there with your comment, Rachel, about mental health, and reforestation is absolutely crucial. The state of some of our trees is dire. We've only got to look at what's happening to a lot of ash trees. When I was young, which was many years ago, Dutch elm disease, of course, I think there's only 200 surviving elm trees that are mature ones. Slight genetic variation with them, and let's hope that can be multiplied. Various diseases threatening horse chestnuts, I know they came originally from Greece, and also oak trees with oak wilt and so on. But what I think we should be doing is looking at some sort of task and finish panel to quantify this, to look at the costs, the implications, to make sure it's pragmatic and it's workable. So I'm not dismissing this as an idea at all. I think it's a really good idea, but we need to make sure we have a workable solution. So I can't support the motion as it is, but I do think we want to, dare I say, harvest the sentiment. I'm sure we'd all agree with that, because trees are crucial. You've got carbon offsetting as well, really, really important. I am concerned when it puts here a little bit about targeting poor quality farmland. How do you define that? Having been a farmer for many years, and I can remember years ago, sandy soils were, with irrigation, fine for root crops and so on, but a lot of them were very, very poor. But now, of course, they're quite a valuable source for pig production, which probably 30 years ago, you wouldn't have thought like that. So we need to be careful. Again, I understand the sentiment. How would you do it? So let's not lose it. I think there's huge potential in a lot of farmlands and some of the fields on field borders and so on. We need to encourage farmers where there are odd corners and so on that could be done. That's fine. So there's a lot in there, but we need to have a practical, workable solution. And I think if we could all come together and look at a way of doing that to support your motion in a practical sense, to me that's a way forward. Because I think, as I say, it's a very, very good idea and I would support it. But the actual detail of this motion, without trying to be pedantic, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to support it as it currently is. But I do think there is a solution which we should use. Thank you.
Councillor Caston.
Thank you, Chair. In the last meeting we had, when we called the climate change emergency, I said when I addressed the council that I'd like to be involved in the climate change task group, and I was very happy to be made a part of that. Our next meeting is on the 9th of October. It's less than a fortnight away. I've already had conversations with the Cabinet Member for Environment about the direction that we want to take it in, and I take this goal of being carbon neutral by 2030 very seriously. It's a very ambitious and goal, and it needs to be taken very seriously with a robust response. But I'm happy to take the views of anyone from this council with me, as the other representatives from this council that will be going to those meetings will do. I just think we need to keep the way clear to create policy in that meeting. Although this looks good, I don't want to put anything in place before that meeting. We can, because that meeting, I think we need to look at tree planting with harbourage, food supply, overwintering, and all those issues, and find something really good that we can bring to this council and planning to deliver the best possible maximum effect from what we're doing. So it's not that I disagree with this motion, but I won't be supporting it for the reason that it's less than a fortnight away, this environmental meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Otten.
much. I'm sure we'll support it. I just have a couple of points. One of them is that we need to be able to enforce and put on more preservation orders. I think there is a reluctance from this council sometimes to instigate preservation orders on mature trees and mature woodland. The other issue at your number 3, where you mention stakes and guards, it is always amazing to me that those guards are actually, unless somebody tells me otherwise, are actually plastic and are left there to actually, while the tree, and then the tree grows and the plastic just lays there in the ground. And as far as I know, and I'm sure Captain, aye, Captain. I'm sure Captain Wiggis is about to tell me otherwise. And if that is the case, then I think we should make sure that we do know that. And the other thing is, you've mentioned rewilding. As anybody who is a absolutely avid Archers fan, you will know that they've won, was it $500,000 for a rewilding process and project. So I admire you in wanting to bring this forward. There are a few issues which I think need to be cleared up, but on generally speaking, you know, I think we should definitely go for it.
Councillor Meyer.
I'd like to agree with Councillor Caston, but go slightly further. My concern would be that we have a task force. I look forward to that task force coming forward with challenging, demanding and testing ideas, but overall integrated ideas of how we can defeat climate change in our back garden. My concern would be if this chamber starts telling the task force what to do, we undermine it. You know, from my experience, if an organisation is micromanaged, it starts to fail. So I won't be supporting it, although I too believe it is a tremendous idea. And ideas, I think, like this, should go to the task force so they can integrate them into the package that they bring forward that we can then examine and hopefully then implement. Thank you.
Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have to say, I'm slightly... Oh, I need to declare an interest, by the way. I'm a member of the Woodland Trust. I'm a tree champion still, I believe. Sorry for not mentioning it at the beginning. Yeah, I don't quite understand some of the comments I'm hearing from the other side. If you're worried about any resource implication, move an amendment. Do some work. We declared an emergency. That means we get off our backside and do something pretty quick. This, to me, looks very comprehensive. I can't see one bit of it. There's some bits around the edges, like the council pledges to increase support. What does that mean? You really want to know exactly to the nearest £10 how much officer time that's going to take? I mean, come on. We need to get real on this. We've declared an emergency. This is perfectly in line with that emergency. This doesn't bind the hands of some working group. If that working group's not covering every single bit of this and supporting that, I'll be absolutely amazed. I will be voting for this motion, and anyone that declares an emergency should also do so.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to touch on a few points which have already been mentioned because I, like many others, support very much the principle of this motion, but I have some issues with some of the practicalities and some issues around the duplication of work given the task force that's already going ahead. So, to begin with, I think I completely agree with much of what's already been said about the benefits of access to woodland. So there's definitely benefits in terms of social prescribing, the potential impact on particularly actually child and adolescent mental health services, CAMS for short, and mental health issues for those people who are older as well. And we've talked upon the benefits of having trees of remembrance. And if there are members of this council who are interested, I would encourage you to speak to either St Nicholas Hospice in Bury or St Elizabeth in Ipswich, because they have very good schemes where you can plant trees in remembrance of individuals. And I think that touches upon the point I would like to make, is that there's a mixture of initiatives that we can draw upon to tackle this issue. It doesn't have to be Mid Suffolk District Council. There's a lot of individual activism that can be done in support of this. Now, the reason why I'm slightly sceptical of some aspects of this motion is for two reasons. Partly because I think it duplicates the work that's already being done by the task group that we've set up after the climate emergency declaration, and partly because of the work that's being done around the preservation of biodiversity corridors. And I think what's the thing I take slight issue with is partly because I don't wish to tie the hands of either of those two groups, but partly because of some of the issues we are asked to approve as part of this motion. I accept we can change the odd word, the odd sentence, but there are some things which are so abstract, so broad, that I just don't feel reassured we can approve them without actually understanding their consequences. We've been asked to directly invest in land purchase to target poor quality farmland. But what does that mean in practice? How much land are we going to purchase? At what price? Which bits of land are we going to target? And then with regards to farmland, which poor farmland is a very broad term. What type of grade of agricultural land are we going to target? And I just don't feel that within this motion there is sufficient detail for us to pass it and to understand the consequences. So what I would propose, and I think as many others have done, is that this work and this initiative be dovetailed both with the work that the task groups are doing and be considered by Cabinet so that we can have a proper understanding of precisely what we can do and what resources we have available.
Councillor Pratt.
This is not really a motion that I see that contradicts or in any way kind of muddies the water of the biodiversity motion. It presents a new idea that will in fact strengthen it and help us to achieve those goals. In terms of farmland, okay, so what farmland do we want to target? Well, there are many farmers that are entrenched in debt and are unable to compete, especially those smaller scale farmers. They're not able to compete in today's markets and are, quite frankly, losing the battle. I would like to cite a project that's been going on in East Sussex called the Knepp Estate, which has been running now for a couple of decades, and they've brought huge economic successes to their area. Okay, so they've rewilded quite an expansive area of their farm that was in about 15 million pounds worth of debt before they took on the restoration project, okay, this wilding project. And what they've got out of it is benefits to the local economy because it's attracting tourists. They have a second to none biodiversity patch on their turf. It's actually doing better, and you can see the figures in their publications. In terms of promoting biodiversity, it's doing much, much better than our managed sites, okay? And it is bringing in lots of revenue from tourism. I think that we should consider with seriousness the potential economic benefits as well, of course, as the environmental benefits like cleaning our air and our water and, boosting the soil, giving the soil a boost here. And you also need to remember that rewilding of farmland doesn't need to be just, okay, this is forever going to be rewilded. Okay, it can be rewilded for 40 or 50 years, and then when another patch is not doing so well, we can then rewild that one and start reaping the benefits of farming sustainably the patch that's been wilded. So there's actually lots of potential benefits here, and I know this is more about forest, but in terms of wilding, I think, and planting new forests, we should see that there is huge social economic benefits to be had from this, and it is practical.
Councillor Hicks.
Thank you very much. Well, not for the first time, Councillor Stringer and I are going to disagree. Councillor Stringer thinks this is a greatly worded motion. I think this is, unfortunately, a poorly worded motion. This does muddy the water. We clearly have declared a climate emergency, and that is absolutely one of our top priorities. There is no doubt about it, and that has happened across the entire county, and we should be proud of that. But we should also be proud that we've set up a working party across the county with every district, borough and county taking part. And in fact, that met yesterday for the first time, I understand, and there's work moving forward, and that will be reporting back shortly. So you have it at a county level, and then at the individual districts and boroughs, task forces are being set up. And I think for us to muddy the water, issuing a decree of what they should or should not do at this very early stage would be a mistake. The sentiment is absolutely 100% right. There is no doubt. You know, we can all talk about our private capacities. A lot of this stuff I have done myself, and I enjoy doing and will continue to do. But I think we have to prioritise things to make sure that we do it in a clearly defined way that is very transparent and everyone can see what we do. And if we just come up with a motion that kicks out a few parts on a few issues, that muddies the water. So the sentiment is right, but I'm afraid the wording is not right for me today, and I think it's the wrong time to be agreeing a motion like this. So I won't be supporting it, but I absolutely must remind us all that we did declare a climate emergency, and that is a top priority and will continue to be so.
Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. You've probably all heard about the research from Zurich University that's calculated that 1 trillion trees could be enough to remove 2/3 of all the emissions that have been pumped into the atmosphere by human activities. And it's lovely to hear Councillor Hicks talking about how he does these things already. But one of the practical problems is that it's difficult to find enough land on which to plant these trees. The people who want to plant the trees, or better still, let the trees regenerate, are often not landowners, are often not those who have the ability to rewild anything other than their own front gardens. And that's why it's so important that we as a district council, we as a group, accept this motion and put it into action straight away, not kick it into the longer grass of task forces and so on, because we control land as a planning authority and we own land and we have the power to act where individuals cannot. So it's marvellous to hear that individuals are liking this as an idea, but we need to do something as a corporate body too.
Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. The task force was set up following a successful motion brought here, and that gave an instruction to the task force. All this motion is trying to do, if we adopt this motion, it will surely help the task force. One other aspect, and that is that parishes and community groups, neighbourhood plan working groups and so on, they're interested in planting, but often they feel that that has to be limited to individual trees or small groups. Adopting this motion as policy will not only show that Mid Suffolk is taking a lead, but also encourage parishes and community groups to be proactive and to think big.
Councillor Carter.
Yes, I'm a bit confused about how this could conflict against any task forces or anything like that, other than ensuring that they actually do something rather than pay lip service to a declared emergency to get the heat off themselves. Earlier various points about the implements the effects on food production. Isn't it wonderful that trees do produce something called fruit that can be harvested and then stored, which also can have the economic benefit as well by having these orchards. Actually, people go there, pick their own fruit. Economic benefit of food. Yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful if we did that? But yeah, thank you.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I just remember our council meeting a couple of months ago when we did declare the climate emergency, and I just find it a little bit hypocritical of the administration, because there we weren't happy with the language that was put in that proposal, and we put forward an amendment. Okay, it fell, But if you all agree with the sentiment of this and you don't like the way it's been written, then why, for goodness sake, can't you tweak the words propose an amendment and get on with it? I also find it completely bizarre that people are saying we can't possibly do this because it's duplicating the work of the panel, the task panel, which hasn't even met yet. I'm sorry. What you're saying is just utter rubbish. You're just putting it down because you don't like the way it's been written. Well, if that's the case, just propose an amendment, change our wording to make it acceptable to you, and then we can get this done.
Councillor Field.
You don't want to stretch this out too long, but I really have some difficulty in seeing what the problem is with this motion. We could pass it clearly to the working party, task and finish panel, who could pick the pieces they like to progress. This doesn't actually define how much, as we pointed out, how much effort, how much money is to be put into each element of this work. It's just a principle that says these are a set of things we would like to do. I find, it's not my idea, it's from the Green Group, but that doesn't mean I have to vote against it. I'm quite happy to support anybody's ideas if they're good ones, and this one seems to be quite good. So you can guess which way I shall be voting.
Councillor Guthrie.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to repeat anything that has been said on either side of the thing, but I would just ask Councillor Mansell to stop calling the Conservative group talking utter rubbish. I find that quite offensive. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Fleming.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say I fully support the principles of this motion. To increase tree cover in the district, I recognise the many benefits that come from this and the many benefits of trees, in particular the value in urban areas. And in particular, things like using native species sourced in Britain. There are a lot of things we can do with our woodlands and to promote them. I also recognise, and glad to see you recognise, the good work done by tree wardens in monitoring tree health, safety and recognising the diseases that have been brought into our country and how to control them. However, I'm sorry, I can't support the motion as worded, and I have looked carefully at the words to see how it could have been changed. But there are too many commitments here, and I think this is the main problem with motions like this. The pledges listed include altering agricultural practices, working with planning policy, landscape conditions, and making land purchases. Those are the things that I have a problem with. Now, if we take those out, there's nothing much left. The whole thing would need to be massively reworked. So as it is, I cannot support it. However, the way in which the spirit of the proposal is carried out deserves full review and evaluation. And on that basis, what I would like to do is to commit to taking these ideas through our offices and through a paper to Cabinet where we can all debate it, and thereby, through that avenue, bringing it into our task force and into our climate change and biodiversity agenda, possibly creating a task and finish group to look at how practically these things can be done and what can be done, where we can get funding, where we need to produce our own funding, and taking it on from there. But I shall be voting against it. Thank you.
Councillor Mellon, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to all members for their comments on this proposal, and I'd like to just try and pull a few thoughts together. I'm sure people will be very glad to know that there are biodegradable tree guards available. They're widely used now, and it's well known that the first sort of early tree guards are still a source of litter in the countryside to this day. So we certainly wouldn't propose using plastic. We'd certainly propose using biodegradable ones. Reforesting both our rural and our built landscape has all sorts of proven benefits for public health. There's a very good example of the Green Estate in Sheffield, where they've had a lot of programmes, including planting trees and including wild areas, which has reduced antisocial behaviour, it's improved health, and actually elevated property prices and reduced crime, which I'm sure the Police and Crime Commissioner will be aware of. We have this situation where across our news screens we have rainforests in the Amazon basin and Indonesia burning, and people are asking us, what can we do? Well, one thing we can do, and we're very clear about what is a good thing to do in our own area, is to plant trees. Trees draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They provide a buffer in severe weather. They keep neighbourhoods cool during extreme heat, and they keep them warm during the winter. Trees create soil and stabilise soil. Trees are known to improve well-being. They are beautiful to look at, and they can be incorporated into the agricultural landscape. Some of you will be aware of the work of Wakeland's Agroforestry, which is a world-leading research centre on agroforestry here in Mid Suffolk, which was pioneered by Professor Martin Wolf, who only died last year. We don't have enough trees in Mid Suffolk. We don't have enough woods, and we don't have enough trees in urban areas. And I'm sure that we can all agree that we want to leave our wards at the end of our time as councillors in a better state than when we started. One cast iron way of doing that is to get more trees growing, either through planting or allowing natural regeneration, rewilding. Yes, that's very in vogue at the moment. I'm also a listener to the Archers. This motion proposes a series of measures which will help. They will not hinder the work of the task group. They will encourage it. These are baseline proposals which could very easily be built on. I do commend this proposal to the Council. It's something that will influence the work of the task group rather than impinge on it. It does go further than the government's proposals, but it does not duplicate, in my mind, what the task force will do. We have here some broad principles and some proposals.
One of your 3 minutes, Andy, so to round up, please.
I just encourage folk not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and please support this proposal.
Well done.
Councillor Morrison, would you like to reply?
I don't think I can add anything. Thank you.
So we'll go to the vote then. So all those in favour? And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
So that's lost. The motion's lost. Councillor Mansell?
I'd just like to apologise for my insult. I'm well known to say that my mouth engages before my brain, so please accept my apology.
Okay. Thank you for that. Moving to item number 11, recommendations from Cabinet committees. So that's the JAC/19/ I need my glasses, for Annual Treasury Management Report 2018 to 19. So I'd like to invite Councillor Muller to remove the recommendations on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it gives me great pleasure to actually move the two recommendations on JAC 19/4 as Chair of the Joint Audits and Standards Committee for Mid Suffolk. The recommendation is 3.1 on page 69 and recommendation 3.3 on page 70. So I would like to propose a recommendation, and if any members have any questions, Catherine and Melissa are here to answer those. Thank you.
And do you have a seconder? Thank you.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. This is now open for questions and debate. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. On page 86 of your reports on Appendix C, the report refers to the losses incurred by Mid Suffolk District Council Holdings Limited. I remember when we were debating setting up this company in 2 or 3 years ago, back in Needham headquarters, and I remember Councillor Passmore asking a question about the liability of this, and the answer being it would be on taxpayers' shoulders. So here we've made a, so far, £3.834 million loss. I'd just like to ask if this all folded today, is that the liability, and would we all be responsible as taxpayers? Thank you, Chair.
Catherine, do you want to come in on this?
Perhaps Emily would answer that one, please.
So the question, I think, was in relation to the holding company, and if the holding company closed. If you don't mind, sorry.
If at 2.3.3, page 86 on Appendix C, it states that we've currently got a £3.834 million loss. My question was, if everything folded today, would that be a liability on taxpayers and hence all of us here too?
So this is in relation to Gateway 14. So the holding company, the accounts are consolidated. So it's actually the Gateway 14 loss that gets consolidated up into the holding company accounts. So you don't add it up. It's just the accounting process that we have, because the holding company owns that company, the Gateway 14 company. So it's one loss rather than two losses, if you sort of follow my... does that not help?
Sorry, Councillor Passmore.
My concern when this came up before, I'm not against things like this in principle, but I wanted to be absolutely sure who is the lender of last resort. My concern at the time, this goes back, I don't know, a couple of years ago, if this were to be liquidated, would there be a liability for the taxpayer, i.e. all of us? I don't mean us as individuals. That was a concern of mine. Now, if it was quite clear there wasn't, fine. But I did ask that question because I am concerned that you are potentially taking on a liability, and if push came to shove, and for whatever reason it had to be liquidated, would it be the taxpayer that has to pick up the tab? Yes or no?
So the loan that the council has made in respect of the purchase of Gateway 14 is secured against that asset. So if there were an issue with the company and the company was liquidated, then the council would then own the asset that has been acquired through that company. So in the same way as a bank loaning, yeah, so it's secured against the asset in effect.
Have we got any other questions? Councillor Whitehead.
Sorry, can I just add my thoughts to this? I mean, when you go out and buy a property, whether it's Gateway 14 or your own house, but taking, say, Gateway 14 into account, so you pay the market price, and the theory is that if you put it back on the market, you probably get the same price. Maybe if you're the top bidder, you might not get quite the same price, but then you pay stamp duty, which is quite ridiculously high percentages on some transactions. You pay legal and all sorts of due diligence costs. So you buy something today and you sell it tomorrow, or you get it revalued tomorrow, it'll show a loss. Just like if I bought a house tomorrow, I wouldn't expect to put it back on the market and get my money's worth. But the whole point of this, these are long-term investments. And if you invest and you invest over 15, 20 years, then the annual compound growth very quickly sort of well surpasses the initial cost of investment. I mean, other investments in here, which people seem quite relaxed about, say the CCLA fund. There's a 7% difference between the bid and sell price. So you buy it one day at 100, next day it's only worth 93. But the point is you keep it for several years, and that 100 becomes 150 or 160. So I think the whole point of doing a long-term investment and then getting concerned the next day or the next month or the next year that it's showing a loss is totally irrelevant to the discussion.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Carter.
Just regarding the last point, these investments aren't just on the housing and just on... These are ongoing losses, are continued losses that look projected to be further losses in the future. So, yes, these are long-term investments which are looking to lose more money, therefore the losses build up. It concerns me slightly.
Would anyone else like to speak? So we'll go to the vote then. All those in favour? And that's carried. Agenda item number 12. MC/19/21, Mid Suffolk Sill Regulation 62 Monitoring Report. I'd like to invite Councillor Byrne to introduce this paper and move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This report sets out the latest position regarding the collection, allocation and expenditure of the Council's Community Infrastructure Levy for the 2018-19 financial year. It provides sill collection and allocation related information from 11th of April 2016 to the 31st of March 2019, and the Mid Suffolk Sill Regulation 62 Monitoring Report for 2018-19, and the Neighbourhood Sill Allocations to the 31st of March 2019. The Sill Regulations 2010, as amended, require that the Council, as a sill collecting authority, produces a Regulation 62 financial report for each financial year. Appendix A is the Mid Suffolk Sill Regulation 62 Monitoring Report for 2018-19. And Appendix B is for information and provides a summary of the neighbourhood sill allocations made since sill charging came into effect on the 11th of April 2016. Council is asked, therefore, to note the report and endorse it for publication. Thank you.
Could I have a seconder?
I'm happy, Chair, to second the report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wondered if there's any work has been done on matching this expenditure to where development has occurred. Thank you.
Thank you. Very fortunately, in this instance, I do have some support in the chamber. So I'll ask Christine, please, if she wouldn't mind answering that.
Thank you. Can I just double check that you actually said matching expenditure to where the growth is happening? Yes. Is that correct? That is a piece of work that is ongoing at the moment. As you may well be aware, there is a review of the sill expenditure framework, and the member group are meeting. And in fact, we are looking at that very fact next week on Tuesday. So that will be shared with the joint member group. And then there is an all-member briefing coming up on the 19th of November, where we'll share outcomes with all members that attend that session. Thank you.
Councillor Humphreys.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just a very quick question, really. I see you use a risk matrix, which is really useful with numbers, likelihoods,
It'd be much simpler to read and to view if it was in a RAG system or using colours, and therefore the question is, could we please have that in the future?
Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, almost a philosophical question, really. Do you think that the amount of SIL coming in will be enough money to actually deliver the infrastructure and aspirations of the communities we serve?
That's okay. As you may be aware, as part of the emerging joint local plan, we are doing a SIL refresh or review where we look at our draft charging schedule that has been in place since we started charging SIL in 2016. As you may be aware, when infrastructure providers need to do infrastructure projects, they use something called a cost multiplier, which actually ends up with the cost of a project. When planning permission is granted for something and we serve a SIL liability notice, that SIL liability notice is pegged at the point when we issue it. So there is the prospect of a gap that opens up. What we need to do is to determine our priorities. We've done that through the infrastructure delivery plan, and what we need to do is give some consideration going forward to a refresh of SIL, and that will happen as a result of a viability assessment as part of the joint local plan. I'm sorry, that's a very wordy answer, but I think what we're saying is, yes, we are conscious of costs of infrastructure which are rising, and we need to address that with responsive SIL charges.
Judge, come back.
If I just come back, obviously a recent case in Bacton where an appeal inspector ruled that a brand new primary school was not a new primary school because it had the same name as the existing primary school. Therefore, we have to use SIL funding to build it rather than a separate transaction with the developer. He's obviously going to do nothing but put more and more strain on that pot. Thank you.
Councillor Field.
Just a question about the neighbourhood SIL here. I notice we've acquired 587,000 over 3 years, so it's not a short time, and we've managed to spend, or parishes have spent 21,000, a bit under. What's the issue? I mean, that's not much more than the sum of my county and district locality budgets last year, and that's just in one division. So what is the issue? Is it people are fresh out of ideas? Is it the money just isn't enough per parish to do anything? Or is it the bureaucracy that we're putting upon them that's slowing things down appallingly?
Don't think there's very much bureaucracy in terms of actually paying the money from our accounts into the parish accounts for neighbourhood SIL. We do that twice a year, on the 28th of April and the 28th of October. We've got documents in place, and in fact some parishes are working with us on something called PIPs, which are called Parish Investment Infrastructure Plans. In there, they're determining what their priorities are, and we're helping signpost towards various measures or infrastructure that they want to achieve. I think there is a low spend at the moment, but we are working with parishes to try and encourage that to improve. We've also got some big infrastructure projects which will be coming forward, where we hope to open discussions with the parishes and also ward members and county councillors with a view to seeing if we can get a collaborative spend in order to address the infrastructure priority. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, well then we'll go to debate, not debate, we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour? Yeah, that's unanimous. That's carried. So item number 13, draft timetable of minutes, meetings even. 2020-21. Rather than raising individual queries on any of the dates mentioned in the timetable, can you email the Corporate Manager for Democratic Services in the first instance if you feel there's an issue with any of the dates? Any revisions can then be brought back to Council for approval. I'd like to invite Councillor Morley to introduce this paper and move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to introduce MC 19/22, the timetable of committee meetings, and move the recommendation that the draft committee timetable for 2020-21 be noted, and I would ask for a seconder.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you. The vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Excellent stuff. Item 14, councillor appointments. Are there any changes to placing?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to announce that Councillor John Whitehead has been proposed to go on the Employers' Pension Fund. Councillor Whitehead has been nominated to go on the Pensions Fund Committee. I propose him. I'd like to ask for a seconder, please.
Can I have a seconder? Thank you.
Madam Chair, be pleased to second the proposal.
Okay, we're going to put that straight to the vote. So all those in favour? That's carried. So the meeting's finished, and the next one is the Thursday, the 24th of October at 5:30.